Hello, I am Ronald G. Wayne, perhaps best known as a co-founder of the Apple Computer Company, along with Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. It was a marvelous experience to have been at a turning point in history with those two gentlemen. Although none of us knew at the time that it was a turning point in history, it was just another series of days, another series of events. We had no idea, nobody could have guessed that it would become the Apple enterprise that it is today. Nonetheless, my background in electronics as a self-taught engineer, I started back in the days of vacuum tubes, and I taught myself vacuum tube electronics. And that was in the late 1940s, early 1950s. Following World War II, when the surplus stores were open and you could buy this stuff dirt cheap, and so I could play all I wanted with the materials that enabled me to gain some knowledge and experience in vacuum tube electronics. When transistors came in, I taught myself transistor logic. When integrated circuits came in, I taught myself integrated circuit logic. And over the years, pursued whatever interested me. I saw electronics and mechanics as directions in which to exercise some creativity. I'm just always dabbling with new ideas, with different ideas. Suppose it wasn't done this way, suppose it was done that way instead. And electronics seemed like a perfect fit for a mechanical industry like slot machines, which are all mechanical. And I thought perhaps maybe it might be a good idea to retain the mechanical characteristics, but at the same time get rid of all of the expensive machinery and replace the innards, timing and operations and so on, with electronics. At least that was the direction I took. But I really had no interest at the time in computers. I was simply there trying to help Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, who were 20 years my junior. They were in their 20s, I was in my 40s. And they kind of regarded me as a sort of a mentor because I had at one time formed a corporation for myself. I had done a variety of things that they found impressive and relied on me to sort of guide them along a path. And I was perfectly happy to do that, as a matter of fact. But 12 days after we drew up the contract and everybody signed them, and we went down to Santa Clara County Registrar's Office and registered it as the Apple Computer Company, a number of issues came up, none of them acrimonious. We did not have any disputes, but things began to appear that said maybe I really should not be a part of this. So I sort of eased out and I had my name taken off the contract. Jobs and Wozniak both understood, and there was no dispute about it, and I went on being as helpful as I could with them. But computers just didn't turn me on, so that wasn't it, and I went off and did my thing. Nobody ever diddled me out of anything. My parting from the enterprise was my own choice, and I have never regretted a moment of it. For one of the reasons, I recognized immediately that Jobs and Wozniak were intellectual giants in the formation of, but they were still intellectual giants. I was a product development man in my own right, and but I knew that in any major enterprise, I was never going to get a project of my own. That was not what they wanted me for. Jobs was particularly interested in the documentation system that I had developed for Atari when I was there. And I was sure that he intended that I should run the documentation department at the back of the building with, running 20 or 30 or 40 people. And I just couldn't see myself shuffling papers for the next 20 years of my life. That was one of the things that made me separate. Then too, uh, Jobs was an extremely dynamic person. He had a quality of moving people and ideas around like pieces on a chessboard. And he had an absolute sense of his own abilities, of his own being right. He knew a direction that he wanted to go, and anything or anyone that was between him and it, that was the last place they really wanted to be without winding up with footprints on their forehead. In short, I think it came down to a realization that if I had stayed with them through the Apple corporate entity, I probably would have wound up the richest man in the cemetery. So I just eased myself out and off I went in my own direction, as I did my whole life. I just, whatever appealed to me at the moment, that's the direction that I took.